Hi, and welcome to this edition of Network AF. We have Zac Smith. Zac has started multiple companies in networking, and we're going to talk about how to get into networking, how we learn, open source in networking, cloud versus traditional networks, and sustainability as well. Hi, and welcome to Network AF. I'd like to welcome my friend and fellow networker, Zac Smith. Zac actually is responsible for helping me found Kentic indirectly in that he introduced me to one of my co-founders, Justin Beagle, when Zac thought that I was still in hosting Colo Cloud, and Justin was looking to stay in hosting and cloud, and introduced us. Justin discovered I was not doing that anymore and was like, what is this analytics stuff? And
what is this amazing network stuff where I don't have to take all the server calls?
That's right. And I'm not in the middle of the path, if things die, and companies don't tell me to get all my servers and leave them, move them from the building because Google has just bought it. So well, thanks again, Zac. And could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to, what you do now?
Sure. Awesome. Hey, Avi, it's so good. I'm kind of like a little flattered to be included in the network, guys thing with you, but because I wouldn't normally call myself that. But a little bit about me. So yeah, my name is Zac Smith. I live in New York. Been working in and out of the kind of internet plumbing business for about 20 some years. I landed into it like most people, totally on accident. Had a kind of formal training as a classical musician, and then I needed a job like all well-trained classical musicians, and ended up getting into the web hosting business in 2001. After that, I had to learn around networks and build some things because wasn't so easy back then. You had to hike up the data center stairs both ways, up hills or whatever it was, cable your own Cat5. So yeah, we had to build some stuff.
I don't do that. I believe Cat5 should be extruded from the back of the machine. I don't do that myself.
I did a couple punch downs and polished some fiber here and there, but not very well. So I worked, kind of learning the stuff and figuring it out along the way, building some networks and peering, or at least around people who were doing so. And kind of couldn't get out. Spent the last 6 years building a startup called Packet, where we automated single tenant hardware around the world. And in March of 2020, that business was acquired by Equinix. So now I work at Equinix, where I run the Equinix metal business. And what we do is basically help our customers access the kind of global reach of Equinix. So 240 data centers all across the world with less friction than what you do with Colo. And so we're kind of building an automated Colo product attached to our interconnection capabilities. So that's what I do these days.
Awesome. I'm a customer of Equinix. Those are most of my customers. And
thank you very much.
Our environment lives in Packet. So thank you very much.
Love it.
Yes. So how did you get started? You talk about that. What was the transition from music to networking, which I know other people who have done also, but this was...
We have this kind of, we do an all hands every Monday, and it's increasingly number of people. And we started to put on during the pandemic, tiny fortress concerts. So, the Equinix thing is like a fortress, right? Uh-huh. So instead of the tiny desk concerts, we do tiny fortress concerts. And like every week or every other week, we highlight a musician in our ranks, because it turns out there's tons of musicians who work in, networks and whatever. I kind of have this thesis that most people in the plumbing of the internet either were like the stagehands in musical theater in high school, or like
my brother.
Yeah, or we're in the band.
Tech crew.
One or the other. My story was not that glamorous. When I was working here in New York City to pay my way through college, I spent a bunch of time basically doing PC repair in Fifth Avenue apartments for rich old ladies. And so I figured out that I could make more money getting people connected to the internet with AOL disks and figuring out why their printers didn't work than working at the box office at Juilliard handing out tickets for minimum wage. So that was kind of my intro into computers. I'd always liked computers. Some of my friends when I was younger were really into gaming. So I was the guy who lugged around the PC, and they were the ones who did all the gaming. But it's cool. So I had been comfortable with technology in a little bit of way, but never really thought about it as a career. I was studying for music. So after Juilliard, I needed a job, and I ended up working a night shift at a bank doing PowerPoint. I was 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. working on PowerPoint decks for bankers who actually never showed up to work. They were out with customers. And I was sitting there. You couldn't leave because they might come back, and they needed to have you like update all the prices in the pitch deck before the next morning or whatever. And so I had a ton of time and access to the internet. And so I started thinking, this was just before September 11th, and they were paying kind of ungodly amount of money for us to sit there and do nothing. And I was like, this is not going to last. So I had to figure out a real job or some sort of thing. And, yeah, something. I was like, I can get ahead of this. And so I said, I'll start a business, because nobody would hire a Juilliard grad into like a real career. And so I called a friend of mine. His name's John LaRue, and he was a family friend, the only person I knew who had ever kind of started a business or whatnot. And my parents were both in kind of, trade businesses or whatnot. And he had started a CLEC called PacWest Telecom back in the mid-90s. Wow. Yeah. And providing like dial-up hack call and things like that. And I said, hey, John, I'm thinking of getting into business. Should I start a phone company? And he's like, absolutely not. Do not start a phone company. But he said, do start something with recurring revenue, because if you charge people, sell them once, and then you don't mess up, just treat them well, they'll usually pay you every month. And that's a good business model. And so I basically decided I was going to sell web hosting to musicians, $20 homepages, put them on the internet. Everybody needed a business card on the internet at the time. And so I went to webhostingtalk.com and posted at 2 a.m. in the morning on somebody who could sell me a Linux server.
A Linux?
A Linux server, because I didn't know, I'd heard the word, but I didn't know how to spell.
That's great. Linux. I need a Linux distribution.
I needed a Linux distribution. And and lo and behold, Raj Dutt messaged me back from this hosting company up in Troy, New York called Voxel, and said, sold me a server basically, because I had some time and money, and he had servers and knew a thing or two about Linux, it turns out. Okay. And so that's kind of what got me in. And I remember it was a couple months later, I'd sold, it turns out I was pretty good at selling. So, I had sold a couple hundred $20 a month web hosting accounts to musicians. Mm-hmm. I was kind of like the hookup for, cheap websites on the internet for musicians in New York. And so I put on a suit and I drove up to Troy, New York to go meet,
to see Raj. Okay.
To see Raj. I was going to go and like see what this big company was about and see if I could, really do some business and whatever. And I show up there, and it's Raj and Matt and a couple of his roommates. Raj was late, by a while. And they were just, college kids who were kind of either at RPI or had dropped out of RPI. I couldn't really tell. And so we decided to go into business together. Took a while, but I became partners, and I did a lot of the operations and success selling side. And Raj is, running all the product and making all the good stuff. And we created a pretty cool cloud company, CDN. And that's where we really got into networks, because, turns out at the time, IP transit was expensive. Oh, yeah. and the question was always like, wait, I need to put a lot of servers at 25 Broadway Telehouse, but they don't have a lot of power. Yeah. So where am I going to put the servers that can be near the network? And it turns out that was really expensive. So we needed to put the servers someplace different from the network. And we had to start getting into some DWDM and, building a little metro ring and figuring out how we could backhaul to the right places. So that's how the deep dark hole began.
That's awesome. You make me remember when I used to go to computer shows and buy computer parts and put them together for people. And I remember a moment of crystal clarity when I told the first customer, because of course then they all wanted help with their disk is full and they can't use AOL or whatever.
Because you were the computer guy.
Go to Micro Center and buy a compact with a 3-year warranty. It'll be cheaper and you'll be happier. I'm like, no, we need to buy it from you. I remember when they bought my ISP and the company that bought the company finally shut down the shell accounts. People were like, you need to do a shell business. I'm like, go get a VPS. You'll be much happier. And
it'll be so much easier.
Yes. Like you, I discovered the joy of recurring revenue. This is the first SaaS, Kentic, but recurring revenue, as you said, if you do a good job. Don't view customers as a nuisance.
Right.
I sort of laugh at this whole network as a service thing now, which I'm sure you have a product for.
Right.
But
wasn't it always a service?
Exactly. But it's the modern approach of, hey, I have a service that means I invest in the customer, and things go well.
Well, maybe it kind of borns from the whole, like, when you had to be my customer because I was the only network, right. That it wasn't really a service. It was just like a toll,
Right. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, in monopoly subsidies and all that. So, and it's funny because I had Elliot Nost on, who's at 2Cows, and I remember almost 10 years ago, he's like, Avi, do you want to help me do like fiber ISP? I'm like, ISP? Who wants to do that anymore? And he's like, no, it's, and it is a mitzvah. Like it really is, to help. But yeah, no, I mean, it is a thing. And it's funny because I was at Akamai. I remember hearing about Voxel, and like you wound up getting a number of really good people. I remember when TCAP was involved with you, I'm like, what? They're building a CDN? Who built a CDN? And storage, we were talking about object storage and all this stuff, ProtoCloud. And of course, the testament is you look at what's come out of that. So Grafana, Raj, as you mentioned, NS1, Packet. I consider myself an honorary Voxel Mafia.
That's so cool.
So was that a challenge doing so many different things, in a company? How many people was Voxel, if you can share?
I think at our peak when we sold the internet app in 2011, I think we're like 90 people or something. And we had a lot of products. And it was kind of interesting because I've been thinking about this recently, because one of the things that Raj and I as founders or as partners were very different. I always consider us to be like oil and water. And I thought that was a negative. Actually, it was a super positive looking back in arrears, like with more space and time between you and more maturity, because we were like 20-something-year-old punks at the time, right? We had very different strengths. And one of the things that I was always focused on, I'm the kind of kid who wore my socks to bed just so I could get up and put my shoes on. I didn't want to be late for school, right? That's a little bit different with Raj, who's more focused on like the ideas and the creative. He frankly is a very, very creative individual. And I was very like, well, how are we going to solve this problem? Where's the process for that? And like, whatever. And so I was always really focused on the now in our business. And how could we make money with this? How could we make sure to just stick to this thing? And Raj was always forward thinking, and he, frankly, when in arrears, when I look back, he was already thinking well into, how a cloud was going to work. Mm-hmm. In 2003 and 4, when we started hacking with Zen, when we had no business hacking on Zen, and hiring
and I remember
developer.
TCAP was like object storage. I'm like, why is an ISP thinking about object storage? That's awesome. Exactly. I love talking about object storage, but
totally. We were investing in Swift and committing on that. It's way too early for our own good. Like we didn't have resources for that. But, I think Raj really saw where this was going, but we just had bigger eyes than our stomach would allow, frankly. And that pushed us, but it also attracted a lot of really great people to the mission of kind of utility scale computing and, highly programmatic access to infrastructure primitives. We were kind of pushing that thought process. I mean, execution was, I think, great due to some individuals, but, from a business perspective, I think we maybe didn't capitalize on all of that. But we certainly pushed the limit on where we were thinking. And I also would say that we just, we didn't have a lot, until maybe 2007 or 8, we didn't have too much to lose. Okay. So it was kind of like, keep reinventing yourself and see what sticks. Mm-hmm. And it was a pretty exciting time of early cloud computing, right? Because think how many hosting companies were around and it was very fragmented. There was just so much going on. It's obviously consolidated to a large degree, I think, at this point in the internet infrastructure space, but individual regional data centers and peering exchanges were popping up. And like, it was still a little Wild West. So you could afford to go out there and throw the football and see what happened.
Yeah. And I was through probably some part of my own, I was communicating too technically and not enough at the business level. Mm. I was at Akamai and, for about 8 years tried to get us to build something, which is now a thing, native edge computing.
Right.
Because we had a Java-based edge computing, but, it would have been a different margin profile, a different capital profile. In the earlier days, things
different customer profile in a lot of ways too, right? This developer customer.
But a lot of our customers ran their origin. So it's like the people, right? What can you abstract? If you look at what Akamai did with early provisioning system, commit rollback, of systems, auditing, logging, message queuing, it looks like a lot of those systems, if you have a planetary scale computer.
Yeah, big distributed system.
Yes, but could not get that going. So it was fun to see that kind of innovation. So, the internet community is a little different maybe than some. There can be some hostility, but there's also, co-opetition. What was it like when you sort of got in? Did you have mentors, I don't know whether it was from the investment banking days or in the company, outside the company. What was it? How did you get in?
Well, we had a really interesting setup. First and foremost, there was a big culture of open source at Voxel, which was how to contribute input within the community. We were a big committer to Debian, pushing out as many things that we could into the open. And our first one of the projects that we struggled with was an open source billing platform called CBMS, which then became a proprietary SaaS platform called Ubersmith. And the reason why is because we couldn't afford to continue to invest. The monetization angles of SaaS hadn't really occurred yet. So we were kind of struggling with how to build this, but it was very community driven. So for years, for the entire time that we ran Voxel, we also had this subsidiary called Ubersmith, which armed and provided billing platforms and device automation to basically all of our competitors. And so we were, running the back end of, hundreds of different hosting and cloud companies, as well as building our own. And it was kind of an interesting line to straddle, right, for us. But what I always found in the hosting community and in cloud in general, networking, I think more broadly, is it is a community, right? And that's what I actually align between the early, open source as a thing, right? And you can see it in other things, network for sure. Now people get together. The internet only works if people are figuring it out together, right? And it's there's trust there, and you gotta build those relationships. And one of my first things in networking was establishing settlement-free peering, and to realize that was actually built on trust with people. Are we going to, basically send traffic to each other's networks? Is that how that's going to work? And maintain capacity together, and that's going to be good for both of us. And so doing things like that, I think you can see it in maybe not as much in cloud, which is more of I'm going to call it a verticalized proprietary, approach to infrastructure. And one of the reasons why I started Packet was to help, kind of try and normalize that field a little bit. But I see it also, weirdly enough, in the one that reminds me of my early days in networking and hosting is actually blockchain. That is also really this kind of decentralized, distributed, community-driven thing where it's kind of rising tide reaches all boats, make the tent bigger versus, capitalize on the thing just for yourself. And I found a lot of community and partnership throughout that. And it wasn't always shared with other maybe hosting companies and whatnot in the earlier days, but I found through open source alignment and then through networking that those were very, very inclusive communities that always wanted to help, talk about it. They're passionate. They had, robust communities and knew that they needed to figure out how to work. Otherwise, the whole thing didn't work. And I think that's been one of the superpowers of infrastructure businesses have been that community-driven approach. And I'm hopeful that in things like SaaS applications and cloud, that can also be a thing. But for me, it was always great because you had to get over, and this is something maybe I learned at Juilliard, but you have to be okay being the stupidest person in the room. I went to Juilliard and I was there are 2 out of 100 people who auditioned for the double bass thing got in. So I was not bad, but I was absolutely the worst at the school. Let's be clear. There were virtuosos and I was kind of, making it along. So you have to be willing to be humble and eat that. And when I first got into networks and hosting, I don't know anything. But as long as you're willing to ask more questions, I've found that people are really interested to share and help, which is pretty cool.
I love saying, I don't know yet, and then one of the things I try to advise people to do, not just earlier in career or younger, is when something was confusing, it can be often you don't want to admit that it was confusing because it's like, oh, well, everyone understands, but it probably means that it should have been explained better. When I got into networking, it was all this Cisco mumbledygook about the NLRI.
Right.
Blah,
special
blah,
command
blah.
that you had to know.
Or I was talking with someone who works at VMware, and it's like I told them I had to stop reading the Yellow Bricks blog because like I know what the things are, but it's like a stretched vSAN, blah blah blah, and I'm just like I don't know. But the open source is sort of the antithesis in some ways of the vendor ecosystem of everything. Is you have to fall into the certification hole and do that. I guess question for you is that doing well by doing good? Have you seen a positive ROI on that at Voxel and then at Packet? Because I saw you were very aggressive at Packet, giving resources to open source, and recently open sourcing, that recently. COVID creates this like air gap. I remember in person was when you did the announcement at reInvent of open sourcing, your provisioner.
Yeah. I mean, it served me well. I think that overall the concept of creating bigger ecosystems and more opportunity, generally, like I said, a bigger tent has proven to be pretty good, right? And I think especially in technology where it's all about opportunity, there's more things around the corner. We just need to encourage those to happen. And so being a part of widening the tent or broadening that has always been a good strategy for me. It's also part of broader mission, right? If your goal in your job is to like, I want to be the number one this that provides all the things for that. Okay, I mean that's a goal, right? There's also a broader goal, at least I've attached myself to, is like we want to enable this for the world, and however that happens, hopefully we're going to play a part in it. But we still want to enable this for the world. And so, like when we started Packet, the idea was that software was becoming more portable, becoming more distributed and more, I'm going to call it open, right? And yet infrastructure was actually becoming more closed. It was harder to use and less accessible. And I thought back in my early days of the career and how we started Voxel, we went to Alex Rubinstein at NAC, and he gave us a half rack and a borrowed switch and showed us how to be on the internet and helped out. That would not be very possible today. Right. For somebody to just walk in and get a half rack of colo from somebody who helped them get going on the internet. And so in a weird dichotomy, you had this instant, easy consumption-based access to infrastructure and backbones and thingamajiggers, but you couldn't actually innovate on it at your own pace because you weren't allowed to go play around on a global backbone. You could just use it.
Well, you could just connect and break things, but now people don't like it if you break the internet.
Right. It turns out there's like real things going on it. I'm sure we'll get to that later. But so one of the reasons why we had started Packet was this idea that we wanted to enable easier and better access to technology infrastructure that could be paired with software so that magical things could happen for the world. Sustainability could be achieved through, better use of our resources. Innovation could happen that, was maybe inaccessible in one or the other on its own. And I struggled for many years. We tried, and we wrote a blog post back in 2015 about how I was like, OpenStack is ready. We're going to do it. We're going to get in there with money and resources. We're going to fix bare metal provisioning in OpenStack. And it turned out, no, we weren't. So
many choices. OpenStack had too many choices. Like
run away.
Like dictator. Sometimes you need a little bit of in the middle, like here's the way to do it, not like 5 choices for everything.
And so, we had thought like open was the way, and it was just the wrong place to do it at the time. And so we ended up creating kind of a proprietary set for automating physical hardware, how to make physical hardware accessible to developers. That was our mission, right? And so we ended up creating this, and then we really wanted to open source it early on in 2015, actually. But we struggled with, well, how do we do that when the community is so niche? There wasn't that many people who cared about it. And how could we, the worst open source projects are the ones that die alone on the internet, and so how could we do this when we couldn't find the community? And so it took us a while to build a community that we knew cared deeply about fundamental infrastructure, just like we did. And then eventually we were able to find the resources and support bringing that out. And now it's pretty exciting to see what's happened as part of the CNCF. We think fundamental infrastructure paired with portable software is an incredible boon to, not only our business, but tons of others. And I think we're firmly on the broader, bigger tent is going to equal, more awesome things at this point.
Also, if the open source isn't the core, what we've seen, or I'd say struggled with, is it actually takes more resources to have that community involvement, because of course then you get everyone's opinion. When we started, people are like, "Oh my God, you have an awesome column store database and it's much more efficient than Elastic. Can we use it?" It's like, well, but then ironically you have the snowflake problem, not that snowflake, but you have the everyone wants to do something different problem.
It's hard managing and building like democracies. It's a lot of work. It's not always clean, right? And so the benevolent dictator, side of thing, might work better. And that's kind of where we ended up, which was until we had the resources and a 8-person developer relations team and dedicated engineers whose whole job was to support the community. We couldn't do it and show up with the right integrity, frankly.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So, is there something that, as you say, looking back, that you think you've done, you and your partners have done? I'm also old, so sometimes I say partner instead of co-founder. Have done that has enabled people to.
Avi, you're a tech startup forever. It's all good, buddy.
I will always be. Sorry, we have the ideas. We need to. Again, it's focus, right? You need to do this. Have focus because there's so many things to do, right? Is there something that you've done or a set of things that has enabled so many of the people that have sort of worked at Voxel, and even at Packet to, be the next generation, to start? Because I sort of think that one way to judge how you're doing in your career is the people that you've worked with. How are they doing? What are you enabling?
It's a nice reflection. I don't know if I have all the answers, but first off, I love, not only creating product, I love creating outcomes for people. I think it's really exciting. And one of the true joys I've had in my career is being able to do that. I believe that in infrastructure, digital infrastructure, cloud and networks, it's one of those areas that is still kind of apprenticeship driven. You don't go to get the master's degree in cloud computing and then start a cloud computing business. You kind of show up and work next to the person who's running the network, and then you start figuring out how to run the global backbone, and then that's kind of how it goes. And that to me, that's why I called it internet plumbers, early on, because I actually believe that it's a trade that is super lucrative and necessary and exciting and whatnot. So if you have desire and interest and passion, there's plenty of ways to catch up. I always tell new people coming into the industry, don't worry, it's all changing in the next 1 or 2 years anyways, so you're not that out of date, right? So it's all good. I think being really open to, now we call it at Equinix, new to career, but not treating new to career as, well, this is your first job, but you should know the things. More of let's get you on the journey. And it's our mandate, my accountability and responsibility to mentor you, to apprentice you into this business, right? And that will be a good thing for us because number one, probably will be a great employee and loyal and learn. And if you're passionate about it, there's all kinds of great stuff that we all need figured out. And number two, that will create a career path for somebody. And so I think that at Voxel, Raj had a special quality of really identifying people who were driven to a mission, right? And helping, take in anybody who frankly had a desire from a mission and find the right work for them to do. Some of the reasons why we created whole products were because, wow, this person really is great and wants to work on, is passionate about what we're doing, but we don't have a position. Oh, let's create something for, he or she. And the other was just providing that kind of training ground and being really open to role migration or accountability. Oh, you've only been here 6 months, but you're doing a great job, and now you're the boss. Great, let's do it. That was you can do it. You're just getting started. It's all good. And I think that having that and then supporting people has just allowed that to occur. And luckily, we're in an industry that has been growing, right? A lot over the past few decades, and continues to grow.
No matter what happens in the greater market. Yeah.
Yeah. And so not only was it like, you use the phrase doing well by doing good. Like I was selfishly like, what were we going to do? Go compete for the talent that didn't exist, or help grow new talent, like create new awesome leaders and people. So I think that's just been a mission that I've always had, both selfishly, but for the community, because it helped me. I just came into this industry as a bass player, didn't know anything about Linux. And yet it's done really well for me because other people said, hey, yeah, like that's okay, said Raj, let me show you how to do this. And, Adam Rothschild would always answer my questions. And then Alex would give us a colo rack and say, it's cool, let me show you, right? And those things people gave and opened doors from a technical standpoint. And then from a business standpoint, just had a lot of great breaks along the way. Frankly, I always consider startups to be messy, and you can't, figure out timing sometimes. It just like the world aligns, but you can increase serendipity. And so,
put yourself in a position to take maximum advantage of getting lucky, but you do need to get lucky sometimes.
You absolutely need to get lucky. And then so sometimes the people you just meet along the way, as long as you're receptive, can really just change your trajectory. And for me, I've had several of those from, Raul Martinek came into Voxel in 2009, and we were out of money. We were growing so fast that we couldn't afford to buy anything, and nobody was giving any debt at the time.
Yeah.
And we were just like, we had this super weird position of like, oh my God, we're growing really fast, but we can't grow because we have no money, because we were bootstrapped and had no capital base. And Raul was just such a great partner. He helped us raise the capital. He helped institute like a lot of the things I live by today in running businesses that were not, like I was always overcomplicating it. And he's like, listen, it's not that complicated. You have the right people in the right seat doing the right job, and they're probably going to do amazing things for you. So focus on that. And hey, Zac, like stop worrying too much about things you can't control and start figuring out what you're going to do about that today. And so he gave me some really just incredible personal coaching that showed me how management and leadership, could, and humility along the way, could really create better outcomes. So, that's been a pretty awesome ride, is to meet some of those people along the way.
So we talked about a few things that are related. Getting them young, or at least early. It could be someone who's 50 but new into the industry. But especially getting people early in career is a much more diverse pool of candidates than if you say people that are later in career. So if you're trying to build,
especially in our industry.
Yeah. Or the peering world is more diverse, than say the core internet engineering world. Yeah. At Packet Fabric, Anna talks about trying to sell to computer science people that, as you said, internet is a distributed system. Wouldn't you like to, if you're a math person or if you're a computer science person, like, wouldn't you like to study the biggest, distributed system that's the most critical? At my net access, Alex had the other net access, NACnet. At my net access, we look for the bright, shiny eyes, but it's actually a positive thing to say, hey, I don't know. Where can you show me, or I'm interested in systems or web hosting or networking or.
Oh my God, if somebody shows up and they raise their hand saying, I am super interested, don't know anything about this, but I really want to learn. You're like, awesome.
I almost feel like we need to, sometimes we need to maybe anti-train people that in college, it's sort of like, oh, I'm going to get a JOB and they're going to tell me what to do. And, that isn't necessarily encouraged. So I sort of feel sometimes when we get people that come through, I'll say the system. I have all but 2 classes of an undergraduate degree, so I went through the system. I have 1 semester grad school actually at Stony Brook, which Gail did not like living out there. But my ISP, like you, had already started, and it was clear it was either going to make money or make me very bankrupt, because I could buy an infinite number of modems, but I didn't have the capital for it. So what's the trade-off between, or I guess let me go back, mentorship and the ways in which this is similar to being an artisan in the 1200s. That's good, but is that trickier with COVID? Does it sort of deny access and make it hard. Like, I think sometimes one of the challenges is how do we help formalize some of it in a world where, we don't get to pattern by hanging out with each other, as much as we did. Is that you say net positive, or are there things that you think about that we could improve with that? The tradesperson and apprentice model.
Yeah. I think it's a net positive. I think that the concept of like, ooh, we'll hang out at the water cooler was already pretty selective, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, if you had a badge to work in 111 and then you were already there, then we could hang out at the water cooler. So I think that, flattening in terms of remote has been awesome. And I spent a bunch of my time. I'm the chair of an operating board of a nonprofit called Pursue, which is based in Queens, New York, and helps bring underrepresented communities into the technology ecosystem. And we mainly focus on full stack developers and whatnot. And what's been fascinating about that journey is our average person who applies for our program is making $18,000 a year, usually supporting two to three generations, right? And our, after a 1-year program that we put through on nights and weekends and all the other times where they can actually participate, including getting internet access and providing computing resources and finding, quiet places to work, and do your studying. Average income across the cohorts is $88,000 a year. Mm-hmm. Which is pretty incredible because it doesn't change that person's life. It changes everybody around them.
Right.
Yeah? And creates tons of possibilities for like, oh, I didn't know. Well, she did that. I guess I could do that. And that starts to happen and occur. And we've graduated several thousand people into tech jobs at this point doing this. What I love about that is we always had a barrier, frankly, with Pursuit. And I've seen it as I've entered into a larger company and never had it at Packet where we had a remote first. We don't care if you have a degree, like, felony background check on, misdemeanor drug thing, not an issue for us. Mm-hmm. Like, we had what I'm going to call progressive hiring standard. Well, we also had to because we were looking everywhere in the world for talent with, a certain set of budget that we could afford and certain kind of things, whatever. And so you were always like willing to reinvest in like a globally, with lots of, kind of, I'm going to call it the more thin rules, obviously basic background checks and things like that, but like whatever. And what I found at larger companies is there's systemic things put into the hiring processes that really go against this, right? And so, we've worked to change that here at Equinix, whether it is like where you're home out of, like you had to be out of certain offices, whether it was minimum degree requirements or skill sets that naturally went against new to career or anybody with a non-traditional path in terms of, education or whatever, like must have at least, for an entry level job, must have at least 6 years of experience in the career. I'm like, what? Well, how's that going to work? And so figuring out how to change some of those things and then build, right? By the way, they aren't incredibly successful talent acquisition strategies long-term because you're competing, with a very, very aggressive technology landscape these days, as you know, right? For talent. And so you end up fighting over the same things. And so what I've tried to do is help, and I think it is an opportunity. I call it being long-term greedy, which is like, is it easier to hire the person that already knows how to do the things? I guess so. Maybe. If you can find the person, if the budget works, if they stick, if the culture fits, all these other things, right? Yes, it might take a little longer to invest and mentor somebody. Maybe it costs you more resources. But actually, long-term greedy, like average it out in like a startup, this is where I focused because averaging out over a few years, I actually think that the invest in people and grow them strategy is actually has a better ROI in almost all cases from what I've seen, at least in my career. And one of the areas that I worked in, Packet was venture backed. I know we shared some similar investors and whatnot, was getting buy-in from my investors who immediately turned to like, okay, when do you turn on the hiring and the recruiting? Because we need to go fast because you just got your Series B. I'm like, well, you know what I really want to do is like, I want to go and invest in a mentorship program and go longer and bring new people because that's going to be a talent strategy for me over the next 24 to 36 months. And they're like, that's way too long. You need to go get people now, right? I'm like, well, and so trying to get the buy-in from venture capital I think is also really important, and get like the social accountability side for VCs to say, hey, when we do your Series B, we are going to make sure that we support and fund a mentorship program, like an apprenticeship program, because we know that that's a hiring strategy that will be sustainable in our, inclusivity goals, as well as
you should
getting talent.
Blog about that. I think people understand in the VC world the compounding nature of SaaS, as the great Lencioni writes about, right? The investments we make, and the virality of it. But often, I mean, I've seen, not my investors, I have great investors, but investors where I've said, hey, I see this company shutting down. We can help place those people. And they're like, not my problem. Go talk to the whatever interim CEO I hired to, do the company. I'm on to the next thing.
Right.
But really, it helps the ecosystem, the venture ecosystem, and even other companies in tech.
I would say that, Avi, like you probably see it, but I think one of the biggest risks to our industry in general is the lack of talent. Like, we need more talent. We need more diverse talent. We need a broader base of ideas of talent. Like, that is all good for our industry. So I think supporting that in venture companies, in Fortune 500 companies like what I work for, I'm really proud that Equinix has a strong inclusivity message in DI&B. They've been extremely receptive and changed tons of things related to our hiring. And actually, the pandemic and the remote work situation has actually forced a lot of those things, because everybody's rethinking their talent strategies right now because of global.
When we started, investors were like, pre-COVID, we were 2/5 local in the Bay Area and 3/5 remote, and people like, is that a conscious decision? It's like, no, as you said, we just need to hire people, and if they're good people, we'll hire them wherever. But I do struggle with, I think the industry struggles with this, with how do we do that? I'm told I can't say osmotic learning because those are two big words, but the apprenticeship model, and formalize it, and
I have some inspiration there, and for me, I think you have to commit to the model. But by the way, like, I work at a company now that has 13,000 people all across the globe. The concept of like being in the same place at the same time is not an option, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, as a knowledge company, we have to find ways to be inclusive. For example, Zoom meetings are pretty cool. They're not very inclusive when you have people all the way around the world and asking people to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning to join your all hands. Like, okay, well, I guess we should really think about how we make communication, knowledge sharing, participation to be inclusive regardless of time zone, right? Or language barriers or whatnot. I'm inspired, frankly, by open source, right? My early days participating in Linux had 3 kind of communication modalities. One, message boards. Threaded contextual conversations that were asynchronous. Usenet, right? Asynchronous communication that have deep context that you can still go and Google and find the thought process behind very complex technical decisions in the Linux kernel, because it's like, it's there. And so that might be useful for right now, but somebody coming in who wants to add to that didn't need to be there at the time. They can still get the context, which is so powerful. The second thing is then real-time collaboration, right? IRC, Slack, Teams, Zoom, whatever. It's real time. We can meet, wherever we are. We can have a communication, time zone obviously being the challenge, but we can do that. And the third thing, which I think was what we really got to get back to ASAP, were hallway track conferences, get together, break bread, build emotional connections with people, right? And I think, like, if we can mix those 3 things, not realize that it's just one, it is asynchronous but deep amount of knowledge, synchronous but like relatively hard for context, or large amounts of volume sharing, and third is human connection. Like, I think that's a strategy that can work across apprenticeship models too. You just have to be focused. You can't be like, oh, if it was easy and they were sitting next to me. Like, well, it's not. So, we have to design around those things, and a lot of that will have to do. I notice things like onboarding new to career people is hard.
Oh yeah,
right? Takes a lot of work. And I think back to, was it like GE or somebody who would like do like the rotations? Like, you would spend the first 6 months rotating throughout every part of the business.
Yeah.
I started doing that, and it's working pretty well at Equinix. We're starting to rotate people into the data center, and then rotate them into sales, and rotate them into success. And yeah, it takes a little while for us to get through the rotation, like 3 months. but man, they come out with a lot of contextual knowledge and a ton of relationships.
And yeah, it's the relationships. At Akamai, under a month, maybe it was a month, I don't know, after I started, we started network architecture inside engineering. And then in a month, it was like, okay, it's now a whole separate group. We're unifying the business strategy and the technology. In that month, now it was, Bubble 1.0, we added 400 people in that month. The relationships that were built by having, had that inside engineering and, help all the way to this day, where my brother still has that job, running the network group. And we see
so rotating through to meet those different people, which might take you 1 or 2 years if you were just sitting in your siloed thing and reaching out and trying to create those connections, if it was a forced rotation. So I think there are strategies, let's put it that way. What would be super cool if and I think that this is an opportunity for companies to work together, maybe in the networking space, maybe in cloud infrastructure, like there can be blueprints. You don't have to invent all this stuff. There can be like, please fork my repo on how to do an onboarding process that is inclusive. That would be cool. When we have spare time, come on, Avi, you and me on the weekends.
I'll give it to First Round. First Round Capital runs a Quora-like network for, they call the network, and they're trying to help with stuff like that.
Oh, sweet.
I'll see if I can get you an honorary invite. They made the mistake of running contests on who can answer the most questions. So I like to win those. But
I read on Quora that somebody had answered like 250,000 questions on SQL all by himself. And that's like the Guinness Book of World Records for like most questions ever to answer.
Quora keeps inviting me to like earn $500 a month by being an expert, but I've been off of it. And but I still have people, our salespeople go into companies. They're like, oh yes, I remember reading the BGP thing, that Avi wrote in the 90s, and like, okay, well, we got the meeting. There is a long tail to open source and helping people, and having people that have been in the ecosystem go.
Totally.
But I still think that we have to think about some of that apprenticeship, as you were saying, documenting, across the industry. And I know Nanog's thinking about it, and it's tough. But for someone that wants to break in, in open source, you go, people can look at GitHub and, you get experience working in teams that you, frankly, just having a college degree doesn't usually, even didn't really used to, but, doesn't necessarily. Well, what can people stand out, if they're interested in, in showing that they have the bright, shiny eyes, and they're interested? What makes someone interesting as...
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, GitHub is just a great place because it's super transparent, right? I always, when I interview people, which I don't do very often these days, but when I get an interview people and they say, I'm super passionate about this, I just look them up on GitHub. I'm like, really? Are you? Right. Let's just go look.
Well, do you even, help with documentation, right?
Exactly. There's tons of areas to participate, and you don't have to have any technical knowledge. And if you're passionate about things and you show up with the green thumb and like, I literally know nothing about this. I know nothing about GoBGP, says networking noob, right? But I would like to help clean up the issues list, or I would like to help run the contributors meeting every Thursday, or I would like to take care of the, culling of something. Please teach me. Like, people will be like, oh my God, yes, we could use your help, right? And I think that some of those ways, you have to learn different skills in this remote world now, because before maybe you could go to the meetups, which are a little harder to go to, or you could go to the conferences and hang out on the floor and get the stickers and start to talk with people and ask questions, right? You just have to do different strategies now. But I think that those are all possibilities still. And the world of SaaS is also kind of cool because you can show up and talk with the people on chat and ask them questions and, find out like, can I get a free trial to use this? And like, people generally say yes, right? And then you could like go write a blog post on, hey, here's what it was like to sign up and use Kentik for the first time. And here's what I learned. Wow.
Notice
you would notice, and it would be like, hey. So I think that like, being like genuine and vulnerable in that regard for somebody new to career is actually great, because most people will then really empathize with that and help. And so it means like, hey, I signed up for something because I'm interested in networking and I used it and I had a lot of trouble because I don't know these things and I ask these questions and here's what I learned. That's being open. That's being vulnerable. These are great qualities for new employees. And I think it's also a great way to build your authenticity, which is frankly what I look for in new to career is like, do you have the drive? Are you going to think outside the box to come up with, like to satisfy your questions, right? And, are you genuine? Do you want it? Like, is this important to you? And if so, man, we can impart lots of knowledge. That's not going to be a problem.
We look for passion in, especially early career, in something, right? What's the thing? It doesn't have to be networking, right? Or technology, but
it could be customers. It could be document. I really care about wiki markup,
collecting, or poker, or something. The thing which gets someone to like, oh yes, but have some opinions with humility, but have that passion. And hopefully
I think there's a great like in the old world of ISPs doing the tech support, customer service. Yeah. I think it's just an awesome opportunity to start your career in customer success, where it's really about being with people and being interested in the product that you're representing and the customers and what they're trying to do with it.
And their life.
There's so much opportunity in customer success right now because all of sales is transitioning from this like sales-led motion to success-led, where being deeply, passionate about helping people use the thing is the game, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is just a great entry level, right? Where you don't have to be in sales, so you have to get in that, but you can be in the let me help people. And such a great way to learn and interact a dozen times a day or whatever with people trying to use a technical product. So I think there's a lot of new opportunities as tech moves from just being like the tech side of thing to tech-enabled sales and tech-enabled success and tech-enabled marketing and tech-enabled content, right? So
absolutely. It even
pretty
gets
cool.
Product and design, which is like, how can we make this easier for people? The platonic ideal is every support ticket is a bug. In practice, we don't, with enough functionality, sometimes you can't actually do that. People have disagreements, but I think maybe we could do better as an industry on the SaaS side too. And again, I mean, Packet was sort of, yes, it was SaaS principles, but towards
SaaS-ish.
Helping people understand what is the map of a SaaS company, and what are the skills and overlaps. I'll definitely think about that. As we do, recruiting.
And if you're listening to this and you're new to career, like just reach out to Avi or me on LinkedIn and bug us, because we will probably reply, because that's something we do.
Yes.
And don't feel ashamed to do that anywhere. Reach up, hold your hand and say, I want to learn more. And you'll probably get a fairly positive response.
Happy to do an intro. It might not be exactly, our field. So, we'll do it at the end also, but how should people reach you if they're listening to this and need to reach you right now?
So the snail mail no, just kidding. So I'm on Twitter, ZSmithNYC, or I'm on LinkedIn, which is ZSmith. I managed to get that one. Both of those are the best. You can also find me in Lower Manhattan, generally around. I drink coffee, so I'm usually at a coffee shop or something.
Fortunately, Sasabundi's is not in Lower Manhattan, and nor is Hill Country Barbecue. So
exactly. Yeah, but those are the two best ways. Twitter, DM me or mentioned, and LinkedIn is a great way as well. And always happy to connect or learn more. I also sit on, like I said, the operating board of Pursuit and participate in that pretty heavily. So it's another great place if you're interested in launching a career in tech or whatnot, transitioning from a different kind of career path. That's a good place where I'd be happy to meet you.
Okay. Cool. And I'm Avi Freedman at Twitter and LinkedIn, and Avi at Kentic.com. Hopefully the spam bots are not, doing audio to, oops. I guess actually we do transcripts with this podcast. So it's one of the reasons I liked Casted when I was, some podcasts, don't do the transcripts, which I thought was like, well, we want Google to find this stuff. And then Casted, actually, you can like highlight it and it becomes a clip and you can embed it in a blog and stuff like that. So it was pretty cool. So network and cloud, and, as you said, there's all this transition going on. Like, what's the difference between, cloud networking, SP networking, enterprise networking, what you're doing at Voxel, what you're doing now? People think, with cloud, there is no network, right? It's just APIs. Like,
right. Except that's the two things you get. The one thing you actually have to buy from clouds is the network. Everything else is pretty optional.
We have a friend there. He says he has two sayings. One, there's no cloud without network, and the more Zen one is network is the water of the clouds. It is the substance.
I'm so one with you, Avi. Well, we think a lot about networking in a broad sense at Equinix. It's the core of our business, although $6+ billion of our revenue comes from selling, co-location and related. Right. It's like the reason why people do that is because they can interconnect at Equinix. And so networking is kind of, whether it's, at layer 0 or, above, is kind of where we generally derive our value and kind of our mission around creating connected ecosystems. I think that like most parts of the technology stack, networking is undergoing a really, really seismic shift in most enterprises, from effectively a pretty static, I'm going to call it back of the house operation, where it was in service to kind of some pretty slow changing product cycles and slow changing business cycles, right? Kind of akin to a telecom product cycle in a regulated market. Like you don't reinvent, MPLS every year, right? Kind of thing. And so there's a lot of networking that is built into a kind of concept of a very long cycle and slow change, which allows you to have things like functional handoffs between the architectures and the operations, or like, those things can really kind of work because you can create the run book and the training manual and then train everybody on how to do that. And then like that can subsist for a while.
Right.
And we kind of used to have that in software too, right? Waterfall-y, create software, ship it once every 3 years, like install it and support it with the ops team who did the supporting of the software and the patching while other people wrote the software, right? And now we're in this like continuous release cycle of whether it's SaaS or related, where like write it, run it is the deal. Like in DevOps, SRE model, I don't care what you want to call it, but like it's moving too fast and it's too complex to possibly do operations separate from the creation, right? And so I see that happening, like it's like an echo right now that I see happening in the network side, where there's a big transition towards the world. Network is pretty much software, right? Obviously, there's a significant amount of other things that are required, just like in software, you need the computer to run on it. But like, there is this like wide concept of the transporty thing and whatever. But network in terms of a capability set is software, right? And now that's starting to move at software speed, which is frankly a challenge for some of the organizing structures of a lot of enterprises and service providers. Service providers got there faster because they were in the business of doing more of it. But enterprises now who are finding that digital is their core competitive weapon or their core competitive defense, whichever one you want to do it, like digital is the thing. Well, like networking is just like one of those software tools. And so I think that's causing it to move faster and be part of the innovation cycle versus this like back office. So my hotels or restaurants analogy is now it's moved front of the house. It's experience. Network is the experience.
So any, as we wrap here, any last, thoughts, advice you would give earlier, Zac? Maybe, I guess, would you still go to Juilliard? I guess that's the question.
Hell yeah. I would still go to Juilliard. Okay. That was great. It was like my best choice ever. Got to New York City, met people who were like world class at something and like tried to, frankly, learn how to be self-critical. I would say, ask more questions. It's just like always helpful. And so young Zac, although asked questions, still had quite the, we all have our little egos, right? And whatnot. Yeah. And I would chip mine down. And the other one is I would probably, of course, and this is probably what every 40-something-year-old says to their 20-something-year-old self is like, take some time, enjoy like what you, like I was so jackrabbity, like ready to get going that I think in a lot of ways, some things that I did in life and business, I passed by too quick. Well, Avi, thanks for having me. It's been super fun catching up with you and talking. And I'm glad that we didn't get too far into networks because, shaky ground for me.
We can do that next time. We can do that next time. So again, Zac,
so it's network as funk, right?
Network as fun, network as funk, all those things.
I got you. Okay, yes. Cool.
API for network as a service. So how should people find you again?
Yep. Z Smith on LinkedIn or Z Smith NYC on Twitter. And I'm not going to give you my corporate email because it will most definitely get stuck in the spam. So
okay, well, we won't do that. Well, thanks again, and thanks for catching up. And I've definitely got some follow-up topics that we can nerd about offline as well.
Thanks, Avi. Take care.